Okay, great. I think it's time to get going. I see that a few people are still joining. We have a large number of attendees, so I'm really excited about the turnout. Such an early morning, at least for some of us. Very welcome, everyone. The topic of this webinar is to explore the business benefits of strong customer authentication. The Payment Services Directive number 2, not 3, we might touch on that later, requires or is going to start enforcing strong customer authentication from the new year. So it's going to be a fun New Year's party for those that are not prepared. But we want to focus on the positive aspects of strong customer authentication. And I have an absolutely fantastic panel. I am really excited about the discussions that are ahead of us. So I hope you will enjoy them too. But let me start by introducing myself. My name is Maria Austenaa. I'm at Signicat. I'm leading entry into new markets, verticals, propositions, or geographies. At the moment, my big headache or topic, or passion of interest, is strong customer authentication for PSD2. But I have some fantastic people, as I mentioned. Firstly, we have Matthias from Quick. He's head of design, partner, and a member of the board at Quick. Quick is a digital development company for financial services and mobile app development. And in the last few years, Matthias has focused on the future of mobile payments, PSD2 related opportunities, and really bring a customer-centric viewpoint. And we're going to hear much more about that now as we're starting to discuss. He's an awarded designer and a strategist trusted by the most well-known companies in Finland. I'm so pleased to have Matthias with us. The second, not anything least, and you can see why I'm excited about this panel, is Michaela. She's a business developer at SEB Card, which is the leading card and travel management solutions company in the Nordics. She has expertise in PSD2 and open banking, and is now focused on assuring PSD2 and SCA compliance while looking into new revenue streams from open banking. So again, the positiveness and the opportunities coming out of PSD2. And last but absolutely not least is Monica. She is the CEO and co-founder and chair of the Nordic payment service provider Enfuse. So Monica has more than 20 years experience and is really an acknowledged visionary in the payment industry. And in a very short time, and I checked this, I think we're talking just a few years actually, she's established Enfuse as one of the leading fintech platforms in Europe, serving almost 10 million end users. So that is really impressive. So we're now going to get started, and I just wanted to introduce the topics that we will cover in this chat. So let's see if the technology is working. That's always equally exciting. So there's 4 main topics that I would like us to explore during this panel discussion. And before I let this eminent panel speak, I was just going to give you a brief overview. So the angle that we've decided is to look at the commercial and the business benefits of strong customer authentication. And we wanted to touch on how we balance security and convenience, what's required, what's possible to become card number 1. The second topic is around reducing fraud. Of course, that's an important imperative. Third one is around simplifying and enhancing servicing of accounts. And with that, I mean how to make it easier to open a bank account, get a new credit card, and make use of these cards. So it's both about getting new customers as well as making it easier to access the account and use the credit card. So this is again very much about customer engagement. And the last topic I wanted to talk about is to explore the risks of not complying, and of course the benefits of complying with PSD2 SCA. So looking at this from a more regulatory reputational angle. But before we jump into the excitement, let's just do a quick recap in terms of what PSD2 really means. And I'm assuming I have a very sophisticated audience here. But still, it's probably worthwhile just reminding ourselves a little bit, and there's a few things I wanted to highlight. So the first one is that the deadline is now actually closing. The EBA, the European Banking Authorities, had an opportunity, and they did in the past, postpone the deadline for strong customer authentication, but it's now, they reiterated it will be enforced from the 1st of January 2021. And as we all know, the intention behind PSD2 is to drive innovation in electronic payments and to increase consumer protection. It applies So the aim of that, of course, is that PSD2 will ensure that the banks have the APIs available to third parties to allow account transactions and access to account information. But it applies to all electronic payment transactions, which means that with at least one leg in the EU, which means that credit card transactions are included as well. And we'll see why that is important. The key to realize the vision behind PSD2, which is all about, as I said, innovation and customer protection, is a strong customer authentication. We need to know that the right customer, the right person, is making a deliberate action. However, we also know that SCA is quite hard to deliver. Two-factor authentication, dynamic linking, and with dynamic linking, we means that there's a clear and forgeable message to the consumer. It cannot be misunderstood, and two-factor, possession, knowledge, inherence, so that the consumer is fully informed and makes an active decision to authorize a payment transaction. We also know that the two-factor authentication in particular, if delivered wrongly, can really destroy a great user experience of making a purchase. We also know that SMS one-time password, the most used authentication mechanism today, I think in most countries, is not sufficient. So the question here is going to be around the benefits of that, but also if you all are ready to consider that. And before we go into the discussion, I just wanted to give one example to kind of bring up a different view on how strong customer authentication can work. And that is this is a very simple example from ST1, which is a card issuer in Finland, and they are taking advantage of the availability of electronic identities in Finland in order to make the onboarding process very simple. This is super simple. The customer downloads an app, the ST1 app. They register with their personal details. And the third step is they perform an authentication by sharing their verified identity and a two-factor authentication and saying, yes, I really want this card. And the card is then available in Apple Pay, set up and used. It takes less than 3 minutes. And I think one of the points here is the role of strong customer authentication, meaning the third step here, using electronic identities, how simple that is to get going and how that has really enabled such a streamlined onboarding process. And look, there's no SMS OTP. So we have basically 3 alternative methods that we observe. One is an app for authentication, in-app or separate app. We have electronic identities, as in this example, and SMS one-time password in the future combined with a password to give you 2 factors. So now I just wanted to remind ourselves, and really before going into the panel discussion, I just wanted to briefly mention what we mean with authentication, because this is an important part, and we start to set the scene for what is going to be a very good discussion. So with authentication, we define it as the process of proving who I am, this is really me, and confirming my intention of performing an action, such as allowing access to account information or making a payment transfer, all electronically. And notice here the link to the KYC, to knowing who the customer really is. So let's get started now, and I'll stop sharing my slides so that we can see all the participants. So I actually wanted to start with Michaela, from your perspective as a card issuer. What's the importance of strong customer authentication? How do you see it? How do you intend to use it? What are the benefits that you see so far? Let's just get started.
Well, the background of SCA, as you mentioned, is to reduce fraud and make online payments more secure. So of course, that is a very important aspect of the SCA. But for us as a bank, it of course makes it possible to provide our customers with new kind of services, considering PSD2 and open banking, but still knowing that we can feel safe about sharing the data and money with the right person. So we haven't criminal prevention is a big part of our daily work. So with SCA, we are enabling more secure services while still providing new innovative services to our customers. So I definitely believe it's many great opportunities with SCA.
Yeah, they're very interesting to hear about the aspects of open banking and your new thinking there. And Monica, as we discussed the fundamentals of authentication and SCA, you mentioned the term of it's like opening a door. I don't know if you could explore, more on that topic, because I thought that was a very interesting thought, really.
Yeah, I think strong customer authentication, it's like a key to a door, so to a lock. It is about to prove that you are who you are, as you already mentioned, and it's really a format when we enter from the physical world into the digital world to really knowing who we are. So back in the days when you wanted to open an account or apply for a card, you need to physically go to some place or bank branch to prove your identity, have some documentation with you, but that's taking now to the digital world. And of course, going into the digital world where you don't have strong customer authentication methods in place, of course, opens the door for criminals as well. So I'm seeing SCA really as a key to a door that it's my home. I would never leave my home open that any random person would do. So like back in the days when I'm from the north part of Sweden, you just left the door unlocked and put the broomstick against the door. That's not something you do today anymore. And I think there the SCA plays a big role. And with the ST1 example, for example, it is actually a Nordic solution, and it's a good proof of how you really can, as you say, onboard, do a scoring, and then issue payment methods instantaneously in a secure way. And I think that's the thing that people often confuse security versus convenience. And I am of the strong opinion, and I know Matthias as well, is that it's a combination of both. You don't have to choose. It's just how you build it and how you design it.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Monica. I like that. There's not a choice. You just, you design for both. And actually, I'd like to explore it a little bit further. And really, is it possible to balance security and convenience? And I was observing that 3D Secure version 2.2 from EMV Co, which is of course is part of the How to Solve PSD2 SCA, is really a great example of avoiding SCA, and it is very important, and it's really designed to take advantage of the exemptions. But of course, for account-to-account transactions, we don't really have the equivalent. So I'd like to see, can we turn this around? And so I'd like to hear your opinion, Matthias, as the experts on user experience. Can you share some examples, some thoughts on what it takes to really embrace customer authentication? What needs to be done? Examples. And I have something that you shared with me previously that I'll put up when you tell me to.
Yeah,
Voice of webinar.
I think it's how this of confidence and on that we are coming to they have the does it have have been help our clients to for with payment experience. We have been seeing
Matthias, we still have problems with your sound actually. Is there something running in the background? Maybe you need to try again. No.
Oh.
Fantastic.
Guys coming, if we can do
Yeah, I think you're breaking up really bad, so maybe trying without the video, maybe it could give some more. So I think it would be easy to hear what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have something that takes capacity in the background.
Yeah, I think meanwhile, I can comment on the PSD2 3DS part is that, yeah, you can see it as trying to avoid SCA, but of course, since we are a processor issuer and we have the access control server and we enable 3D Secure, for our customers, we always go in to integrate it. So we have this awesome user experience with Player, for example, and Rocker, where we have added to the bank ID also the capability that every transaction is actually authenticated. So we don't have to start implementing this risk-based authentication unless necessary. Of course, doing a payment it's a huge ecosystem thing. So even though the PSD2 will be enforced and 3DS 2.2 needs to be in place and so forth, that's not the case. It will not be because everyone can still interpret stuff. And in the end of the day, I always say that it's like driving a car on a highway. If it says that you can only drive 100 kilometers per hour, who will control that everyone does it? So there are means to do it, and it will take time. So there will be these bad user experiences, and you know, it's all about in the end of liability. So it's there to protect. PSD2 is here to protect us as consumers, but the 3DS and the 2.2, etc., is there then to shift liability. So when things go wrong, and of course, then it's about making the merchants implement a way to initiate 3DS, and then for the issuer, meaning like SEB or anyone else, to actually be able to tackle it. And the person or the entity that doesn't have the capability will then be liable if when something goes wrong, because of course in the end of the day it's often us users who tend to do some weird stuff, and of course then the criminals. So now I'll be quiet and Matthias try to talk again.
Yeah, I tried switching my input to another mic. Is it helping at all?
Much better. Yes. Thank you.
I was supposed to have a nice fancy external mic, but not this time. I hope there's not too much echoing then going on. Yeah, what I was about to say was that typically when we have been helping our clients to offer better payment experiences, we have been focusing on avoiding SCA. But now we've seen in some markets, for example, in Sweden, when we have been talking this message, that people have been asking us, like, why would you want to skip the SCA? Because, you know, it's not a big deal. It works well, and it will add security. And it's an inspiring example that if done well, SCA can be done so well that it's no hurdle in the process. It's a simple app switch. You show your face, and that's about it. So when done well, SCA can really be a good thing. Also, we can see that there are kind of like flows where actually, well, this ST1 being one example, when we do the SCA, so it's not only about us getting authenticated, it's also about information about us getting fetched in the background, so that it will be easier for me. There's less stuff I have to manually input, so it's serving both security and the better customer experience.
Yeah, and I believe also that we are not only talking about payments when we are looking at SCA, because that's just one aspect of it. Because of course you can have faster payments by avoiding SCA, but you will also miss opportunities to easily onboard new customers, provide them with new services where they can fetch data from other actors on the market too. So we will miss a lot of opportunities by avoiding SCA.
That is really good points, actually. Embracing SCA, because it gives you business benefits. Matthias, just for the, I think for the audience, it could be quite interesting to actually see one example flow that we had. Is that okay if I put it up?
Yeah, sure.
And then you can talk us through that one. And I'm just going to share my screen again. Now, can you see it?
Yeah,
Yes.
I can see it now. Yeah, this is just a bunch of screenshots from a Swedish merchant selling tickets, and how it looks like when you make a payment and when you authenticate your payment. So basically, there's an automatic app switch into this Swish payment application. You press a button, another automatic app switch takes place, you will authenticate yourself with biometrics, and yet one another automatic app switch takes place, takes you back to the store where you started from. So basically, that is how it could be done, and in my opinion, how it should be done. But way too often you see places where you have to manually input the kind of codes into the applications. You have to manually switch between apps, and all of these things, they add up, and they end up creating like a lot of unnecessary taps and friction into the process that shouldn't be there to begin with. We have been analyzing some Finnish alternatives where basically the amount of clicks strongly correlates with the rating that people give to the solution. So the more clicks there are in the process of a certain bank in the authentication solution, the worse is the rating.
And I believe that this example really shows, I mean, living in Sweden myself, how easy it is to perform an authentication or signing with the bank ID, and how easy it is for us in Sweden to just change bank. So if you don't really take advantage of the opportunities with SEA and of course other innovative services too, I can just with a few clicks and some few minutes change bank. So we really need to focus on the opportunities and build good services for our customers.
Exactly, yeah. And one could think that in these times of, well, first of all, open banking, enabling things, and then of COVID situation of people not visiting physical stores, so or branches, it's a very relevant competitive advantage if you can get your customers onboarded fully digitally.
Yeah, that's a great point, Matthias. We recently did some research on consumer behavior in terms of both onboarding to banking services and becoming a new banking customer, but also accessing banking services. And the last one was done now during May and June. And what scared me was that in 2019 there was 40% of people said yes, it's difficult to onboard. Some of the processes were awful, but it was getting there. Now, during this COVID kind of pandemic lockdown in many countries and so forth, 63% said they had problems onboarding. 41% said that they had problems in accessing the bank accounts. That really surprised me, and I think there's a lot of improvement for being more prepared about not being able to walk into a branch. So I completely agree with you, Matthias. And I think that there is a lot more we can do here in terms of improving the user experience. So I'm going to stop sharing so we can move to some of the other topics. But I'd like to stay on this where we ended up now, really, in terms of looking at some of the business benefits of SEA. So Monica, I was just going to ask you, are there other things that you see that we could also use?
How do you mean? I think like in general, of course, we need to understand that in the Nordics, we are having it quite easy. As to say, we have different types of methods, and the banks trust each other on some level. But of course, we are talking about people's data and about money, so it's always a challenge. But going outside of the Nordics, it's quite different, and it's very country specific. And there, the KYC, so knowing your customer, proving who you are, of course, gives some challenges. So I think it's important to understand that strong customer authentication, it's a two-folded process. First is the first time that you identify and prove that you are who you are, and then the next time. So, and I think often when you do the first time, it's a bit more challenging. In the end of the day, getting a strong customer authentication method in the Nordics requires you to visit the bank branch someday, at the first time, and maybe people don't remember that, but at some point you have physically been somewhere and you've proven that you are who you are, and then you become onboarded, and then the trust network starts to happen. But then if you think about going outside and looking at the new players and the neobanks who are scaling, we have good examples of N26, Revolut, etc. How do they do it? It's of course a lot to do with how do you become onboarded the first time, and then to add on here the actual identification afterwards. And here is where the SCA and eIDAS. So if I think about Signicat, your services, the mobile ID, it's about how do you get, when you have been verified that you are who you say you are on a decent level. And there are a lot of players out there, OnFido, Verif, W2, etc., who help with the first time onboarding. But then to actually issue a token or STK or strong authentication method, I think that's really a good thing to have, because then you can onboard anyone, or you can enable that person to initiate all sorts of things, payments, adding on more services. So those are important factors. But understanding it is a two-folded process. Somewhere along the line, you enter from the physical world to the digital, and you need to do it by proving who you are.
So it occurs to me when you're talking, Monica, that it's while we're seeing these fantastic examples in the Nordics with established EIDs, and Sweden is a prime example because of the nice user experience of Bank ID. It's also about designing the services from the beginning so that you have a smooth KYC process. You digitally identify the customer. There's OCR, there's NFC, there's many tools for doing that, and you combine that with an authentication mechanism. So you think about getting the customers onboarded with getting the customers back in again, in the same way, or as part of the same flow.
Yeah, and definitely, of course, here we need to understand also that there are the levels. So what is the product that you're issuing, and what is the capabilities to use it? So again, entering from a physical world to a digital world, and if you enter physical money into a digital money, and then you can also extract from digital money to physical money, then you come with all the challenges of anti-money laundering, terrorist financing, and so forth. But it's important to just remember those elements. So when you start planning, really looking into what's the product I want to issue, how do I want it to enable, like Michaela said, the upsell, more services, more feature functionalities, maybe starting from a prepaid product where you only can take money from a bank account to the prepaid product, and you can't, maybe you can pay anywhere digitally, but you can't withdraw it at an ATM. That could be one step, and then it requires a certain level of KYC and the onboarding side. But then you can also step it up. So even if the strong customer authentication is there technically to be really strong, you can also make it better by adding on elements on the KYC process. So for example, if you want to start issuing then a credit, there are then other things to be kept in mind. But I think it's a lot to just understand what is it that you want to achieve. And even though Enfuse, for example, is a tech company, we really go in to help our customers make good business, because tech, in the end of the day, SCA is not a problem. eIDAS is not a problem. Certificates are not a problem. It's how they are designed, the sequencing. That's become, like, I am a bank customer of a bank, I'm not going to name names, but we're not a very good flow. And exactly like Matthias had the example where, it's the auto switching. That's awesome thing. With my bank and the SCA, they've chosen technically a really good platform, but I need to remember when I do to jump back to the app, initiate that one, make sure that I'm using my private side, not my business side, etc., etc. And that's nothing to do with that the SCA is bad. It's just maybe, or it's a bad UX experience, that the flow has been designed in a bad way.
Yeah, the UX is important, I think, and And so, Mikael, I'm curious. I don't know if you have any numbers on this, but can you see a difference in terms of customer usage on the different cards depending on the user experience? Maybe it's a bit of a difficult question, but
yeah, I mean, we have already have a little light version of SEA implemented here in Sweden, for example, considering the bank ID, and we can see that people still are using their cards and such. So considering how easy the flow is, we can still see a continued use of the cards. So from that, we can definitely see that it is important with a good UX flow and such, because customers, they need to feel safe, but they shouldn't be thinking about the whole process and jump back and forth in the apps and such. So I don't have any specific numbers, but we can definitely see that it is important to have a good flow, because otherwise they will jump out of the purchase and they could use another card where they will have other options to use.
So I kind of wonder whether there is an opportunity here for banks with the best user experience, especially now with SCAB really becoming required. And then if you're resorting to an SMS one-time password plus a password or something to make it 2 factors, and then you have other cards that have a much slicker experience, is this an opportunity to kind of grab share of wallet or share of transactions coming from the wallet, or wherever you want to say it? But not all cards will be profitable, I think, if you have a collection of 5 cards in your wallet. Depends on which one you use, right?
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, considering if we set aside the different cards can have different kind of bonuses, but if we're just looking at the cards and the functions, they are all the same. You are using them to make a purchase. So for us to stand out, we need to have a smooth usage for the other services around. So if you want to make a purchase, then the flow should be easy and simple. You should be easy to go into the app and have control over your transactions and other services. So we need to work with the SEA to make it better and stand out compared to our competitors, because the card is simple to use and switch to another one.
And I think here, as a comment, we are, and I'm happy that we are a good customer, I would hope, for Nordea as a corporate, so NGS as a company. But you know, we changed from Nordea's first card as a corporate card to Pleo. Of course, Pleo being our customer, but it's because of the UX. I mean, like, I suck at receipt handling. I mean, like, seriously. And I've done that for like ever. And just seeing how easy it is, and in the integration, instead of having exactly the SMS OTP that first card had, and because I wasn't the Nordea customer normally, so I didn't have the Nordea, SCA solution codes in place, etc., etc. Pleo, awesome. You know, it takes my receipts. It's really made my life easier, because our accounting people don't hate me as much as they used to. So UX wins.
Yeah, we can see the same here at SB Card too, with the smart receipts, that the services that we are providing, that it is these kind of services that will add the value to the customers and make them stay.
Exactly, and SCA is core of that. So I think that's such fantastic examples of business benefits with a smooth and secure SCA, strong customer authentication. I wanted to, please, Matthias.
I think it's lovely how now the competition between banks will be getting more fierce and more fair in a way when open banking is taking place, and PSD2 is kind of taking down some barriers, and now basically the best UX will be a winning factor. So I would expect that we will see a lot of more competition happening in this area, and it's only good for us consumers.
It's a great push for the big banks to just start to focus more on the UX. Sometimes we need it.
Yeah, and I think it's just a short comment also. If you look at the neobanks, just the concept of neobanking, it was to just pick and choose, and most of them, when they started out, both N26 and Revolut, they started out offering other banks, so the so-called incumbent bank services, but just packaging it in a neat way. And I've always said that any bank could do it if they put their minds to it. But of course, it is a mindset. And I also believe that PSD2 is making the playing field even, but it's actually helping the banks if and when they decide to see it as an opportunity instead of fighting it. But it's like in normal sense, you know, change is often something that is seen upon as a horrible thing in the beginning, but really picking up and in our benefits as consumers. So.
Oh, that's great points, really. In terms of the process of this webinar, I will open up for questions. I see there's a few questions that's been coming in, so we're going to open for questions just in a few minutes. I wanted to touch on two more topics briefly to get time for questions. One was fraud, and the other one is compliance. But I also want to warn the audience that I'd love to run a poll just to see, to get some more input into our Q&A session towards the end. So when I start this one, please listen and respond to the poll and prepare your questions. So there's a lot to do as an audience here. We're keeping you engaged. So while I'll do this in parallel, I'd love to hear about fraud. Is that really an important driver for SCA? Is that the priority? I mean, I've heard about all these fantastic business benefits so far, but what about fraud? It's big in the industry. You know, we're talking about billions. So I don't know if Michaela, if you have a perspective on this. Yeah, as a driver to introduce SCA.
Yeah, I mean, the fraud aspect is the main reason for the SCA. So of course it is important that it will actually do something about fraud, which I definitely believe it will. We can already see that considering our light version of SCA here in Sweden, for example. But I mean, I definitely also believe that there's an aspect of trust here for customers too, because they will not in the same way know about the SCA, but they will definitely see the steps where they have to authenticate, but also that we need to make sure that they feel trust for us, because there are criminals out there always finding new methods to get to our customers and their money and data. So we need to make sure that SCA prevents frauds and still remain a trusted partner in the environment that we are in right now.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it's like I wouldn't leave my Lamborghini, which I don't have, unlocked. I wouldn't leave my house, which I have, unlocked. So of course, fraud, it's a major thing, and it's not just about fraud. It's about fraud, or let's say it's fraud in many formats. It's about human trafficking. I mean, like sometimes I feel we are so naive in the Nordics because we live in a great part of the world with the, you know, our problems in the end of the day are not very big. Of course, we have the common problems of the pandemic and the climate change, and those are the common problems. But otherwise, looking into payments, definitely, you know, money laundering, human trafficking, and all those types of things are a big problem, and that's where the SCA comes to play. So it's about, you know, protecting us as individuals, but protecting societies and groups of people. So I also believe that the SCA is a part of making us all equal. So when we own our identity, even if we would be refugees coming in and we can prove that we are who we are physically present, and we are physically, you know, being given a bank account or whatever, or money, then we need an authentication method again to enter into the digital world and have the possibility to identify ourselves. And then of course, it's, as I mentioned before, it's the level of what can I do and get with that type of authentication, but it's the KYC that comes to play a lot there.
Yeah, that's an important thought as well, that this is creating a level playing field, and it's inclusion as well, inclusion into financial services, inclusion, of course, in the digital world. That's how everything is being done now. So that's something we definitely should not forget about. And I like the fact that you're saying the SCA is the equalizer in that sense, by starting proving who you are, giving everyone access. The last topic to touch on was compliance. What are the prospects of compliance, and is it important to comply, or are there other, you know, at the moment my impression is that the tools that the financial services authorities have or conduct authorities have in the various countries are different, not quite as well defined. They've still been, exploring this space a little bit, is what my impressions. But of course, at the end of the day, the FCAs, they have tools that they can impose when the industry is not doing the right thing according to the regulations. But still, this has been some gray zone. So I just wanted to get impressions from all of you in terms of how important is compliance, what's really driving the need to be compliant, and what's kind of driving the actions.
Well, of course, it's always important to be compliant according to a regulation like SCA. We were talking about fines earlier before this webinar too. I mean, we don't know the fines or the penalties, but I believe that it's penalty enough, and we should be most afraid of losing customers' trust. Because if we can't handle their data and money correctly, they will leave us. So, and we don't have any money to pay the fines anyway, but we need to make sure that customers trust us and feel safe about being online, considering the times now we are moving to online payments and such.
Yeah, and I agree 100% with Michaela. It's about trust. So compliance, it's like the law that says how you can and what you cannot do. You need to have the police, so the financial supervisory authority, or in the case of, for example, 3DS, the schemas. People need to get penalties, and unfortunately, we as human beings are in a way that if there isn't a way that we will go to jail or pay up fines, the trust will not occur. And that's just how it works. If we think about Bitcoin, for example, I mean, why isn't it more adopted from a technology perspective? I think it's more about how it's regulated and how it's trusted by the many. So compliance is important, and embracing it's the easier way, instead of, as we spoke in the beginning, trying to avoid it. So that's how I see it. And of course, every day it's good that there is, the CEOs, being one myself, knowing that if we're non-compliant, it's my ass on the line personally. But of course, it's the trust factor. And how I used to say is that if we mess up, which we won't, we might as well sell flowers on Åland in the winter time. It's equally good business. So if you're not a trusted service provider, you're nothing. So that's just how it is. Fortunately, that is how it is, and that's how it should be.
I also want to quickly point out that I think that being compliant is kind of like, or should be, the starting point, whereas many companies still see that as the end point, that okay, now we are compliant, now we can stop. Whereas I think that okay, now when you're compliant, now you should start thinking how you can make it better. So all too often people have a sucky experience that's compliant, and then they are like, okay, we can tick the box, we are compliant, and that's about it. But typically you can do stuff to make the experience better after that.
Yeah, and I think one of the big challenges, talking about sucking, is actually and I'm going to throw a little bit shade on the bank's implementation on the API side, is that, they do it, some do it to be just compliant and not see the benefits of it. And of course, there I see the competition advantage between the banks. So, the ones who have good developer portals, but actually good production capabilities, those are the ones that will ultimately come out as winners. So I 100% agree with Matthias. Compliance is the starting point, and then you start doing the awesome things. And I also see, being a regulated entity myself and being connected to banks, we really see the pain of, they put the bling blings on the sandboxes and awesome UX, but then when you go to real production, it's apparently often different people doing that thing, and it kind of tends to become a nightmare.
That's, I think, it's so interesting with PSD2 and SCA, because it is a regulation, but I think it's quite new about the regulation is that it has so many opportunities lying within it, because often you think that regulation is something boring, but here we have so many things that we can do to actually gain new customers and new services and such. So we need to switch our mindset from thinking regulations are boring and understand that the possibilities we have here.
Yeah, and that's why, Michaela, in 10 years' time, when I will follow your career, you will be successful in the banking industry, because that's the key. It's a mindset thing. I mean, like, I'm a former wanker, with all love to every banker, but that's what it is. It's a mindset. And I also used to be the one who just saw like, okay, let's just comply, enough said, because you focus on one thing. But, you know, seeing it as you both said, Matthias and Michaela, those are really key to having a successful business.
Fantastic discussion. I'd love to continue this one, but I wanted to make sure that we give the audience as well a chance to ask their questions, and we already got a few good ones coming through. I've done one poll, and so thank you for participating. Let's start the second one, and while you answer, also think about the next question, and I will also read one of the questions that we got coming in. So I've started a poll. That probably means that you can't see us, I think. So to the panelists, we got a very good question coming in here. Do you believe it could be benefit could benefit user experience if there was a neutral party that was the identity provider, rather than the individual banks at the European or global level? So I guess this is an example, you know, if we're looking, for instance, to Finland, where it's federated with individual banks, and here we, versus Sweden, where you have a common bank ID. But there are probably other ways of interpreting this, this as well. So I don't know who would like to answer.
Maybe a short answer. I think it's a bit challenging. I would say like this. It's about where in the world people are used to trusting. Who do they trust, and who can those collaborate within the trust? So I don't foresee there being a global or even a European, you know, service provider servicing everyone. And I don't even think that that would be a good thing. Because of course then, you know, you put all your eggs in one basket from a security perspective. But having it really standardized clearly, and having clear processes on how to implement it, if banks, for example, or entities would collaborate. Of course, my personal opinion, this is what I think why it can't be one single. But my personal opinion that I've said before is like, I don't know why we can't, you know, be chipped when we are born, and then you just scan it and you go. But that's a discussion we don't have time to go into. It would make life easier, but I do understand that there are other challenges in that. But that's my thing. More standardized approach on best practice user flows, and then the federation would be good.
Yes,
yeah, and I just looking at Sweden here, you mentioned that there are banks together that have the bank ID solution. I mean, for us at SEB Card, for us, we are able to focus on the services because the bank ID is already in place. So we're not responsible for that part, and can then focus on the actual service that we want to provide, and then we can rely on the bank ID solution that already exists. So for us, it's great, and for the customers, it is also great too, because they trust bank ID. So we have a little bit of a win-win situation when it comes to new services.
Mm.
Yeah, at the same time, if bank ID had bad experience, you would kind of be stuck with that.
Yes.
So in that way, I would imagine that now once experience factors will become more relevant for the business, and this will possibly be a competitive advantage, like which bank has the best experience, we can also start seeing some development in other markets where we don't have that kind of centralized solution like we do in Sweden.
Related to this, there's another question that came in, which I think it's interesting, but I think it's going to be very hard to answer actually. Talk about digital identity. The issuing of digital identity is fundamental for SEA, like what it's called, the KYC. Why do we not see more government issuing of digital identification methods? Why is the government not more involved in this?
Yeah.
If anybody wants to-
Well, I have a personal, again, view on this, and that's a good thing with being old, is that I can have this, or I'm comfortable on sharing. Yeah, that's a good question. Exactly. Why? That's what I was just referring to. I would say that would be much better, just from the fact that if we think, I go and get a passport in Sweden. I'm Swedish, I'm Finnish, so I get a passport in Sweden. It's easy. I go to the police station, they scan my fingerprint and everything. It's a one machine, one-stop shop, you know, for passports. And I go to Finland, it's different. But I don't understand why I can't be given at that point in time the credentials. And now I'm thinking it from a perspective of a citizen, and then using that to be onboarded to other services. Banks have been leading the way, and it's just because we talk about money. So for some reason, digital identity and that digital world hasn't been important for company, yeah, I mean, like governments and countries. So the banks have led the way, and that's why we see the bank IDs, the federation in Finland, and for example, and that's just how it's been. But I would really hope to see more of that. But then, of course, come the next questions. Again, we are living in a good part of the world. Just exit into Europe, see the European countries, not mentioning any name, but like Poland and Hungary, for example. Do we really want the government with the current political regime to be part of that process? I don't know. It's a good question, maybe.
Yeah, that's a hard one, the role of government in identities. I think we got time for a very short one more that I have here, and then I'm going to show the polls. To be compliant, does a bank have to have identification when a customer applies on the website, or is the regulation open to sharing then the identification afterwards? I think this is again coming back again to identity verification requirements for AML and others for onboarding.
So I think I need to hear the question one more time.
Yeah, apologies. So in order to be compliant with regulation, and I think this is AML regulation primarily as opposed to PSD2, does the bank need to have the identification of the customer when the customer applies to open a bank account on the website, or would the regulation allow the identification to be shared afterwards, for instance, before the first transaction is being made?
Well, as again, an old banker being part of this process for like many years, of course, in order for you to become part, so when you become a customer on a website, for example, you do the application, then and the application you insert stuff about yourself, and that's part of the KYC process. So you give information about yourself, then you accept the terms and conditions, and then the SCA is there, the strong authentication, to prove that you are who you say you are. So you can activate, let's say you apply for a card and you get a physical card home, it's not active. It becomes activated, for example, often when you do the first chip and pin, because then it's to verify because it's been transported and you get the chip letter later. So those are security aspects, but I would say that in order for a bank to be compliant, or anyone issuing payment methods or banking related where you can transfer money or data, yes, before you can do anything, you need to be identified. Otherwise, it's not secure. However, I see a lot of weird stuff happening globally, and I get contacted by a lot of, how should I say, interesting companies wanting to do interesting things. And I just saw today that the FCA in the UK is doing to a company that has said that they are in the path of becoming a regulated entity, that they are onboarding customer and saving customer credit cards data without having the authority to do it. And I think this is the challenge, that the supervisory authority, they supervise entities that are known, so entities that are licensed, But then there's a lot of weird stuff happening around the world with a lot of weird players. So I think the challenge is for us as consumers understanding if there is no SCA involved, you shouldn't onboard because it's probably something really weird. That's how fraudsters and just I would say weirdos and think people without knowledge of the payments do. There's a lot of I would say startup companies are like, how hard is this? I just put up a site, onboard, store card number. You're not allowed to do that. So unless they can integrate the SCA, don't use it.
Oh, sounds good. I'm going to share the results from the poll before I give all of you 30 seconds to kind of close your, to make your final statement. So the first one was, what's the main reason for main motivation to use strong customer authentication? I hope you can all see this. And of course, I was pleased to see the interesting. I was hoping more would see the business opportunities. So let's continue that discussion. And we're happy to share these results afterwards as well. I thought this was fascinating. Here, the preferred choice for SCA. And I think this reflects the fact that we have a Nordic audience as well, that existing electronic identities is the most preferred choice. Banking app, a separate app, comes as a good number second. And I'm curious to see what other is. And then let's take the last one in terms of what's actually being used at the moment. So half of the participants are ready, which is good, and we got about half of the audience participating in this question. So that's actually excellent. Well engaged. Yeah. So that's not too bad, but there's a little bit more work to be done. Okay. So Michaela, let me start with you. What would you like to make sure that the audience is taking away from this discussion?
Well, we have been talking a lot about the opportunities that lies within SCA more than just compliance. And I believe that you mentioned that you were a little bit surprised not more were talking about or answering the poll that they were believing that the main reason for SCA was business opportunities. But then we need to remind ourselves that SCA is the main motivation for it is to reduce fraud. And so that's what it's good to understand that this is something that will reduce something that we want to get rid of. But then our mindset should also be that we can gain more than just reducing fraud. So that's why I think that I hope that people will take with them from today.
Good one. Matthias, 30 seconds from you as well.
Yeah, I would say that if you are a bank or another organization who is dealing with offering the experience for doing the strong customer authentication, then you should really take a look at Bank ID and see how you can create something that works as nicely. Then if you are a company that is utilizing SCA in your business, then you should really think through how to make it as convenient for the customer as possible and how to extract as much value as possible out of that operation, not only doing the authentication, but also trying to get the other data so that you can minimize the manual data input.
Excellent. Monica, the last few wise words from you.
Yeah, mindset. It's a mindset. So I have to say that if you think about January is coming up and only half were compliant, I would urge the other half to really put speed into it. Otherwise, you will have some challenges. But in the end of the day, embrace compliance. Start with that. As Matthias said, it's the beginning. It's not the end. And then look at the flow. How do you actually build a UX flow and see this as a business benefit and a way to compete in a good and secure way and earning trust. So start with that. Tech is easy. There are a lot of good service providers out there to help when you know what you want to achieve.
Great, wonderful, thank you. Tech is easy. Embrace secure customer authentication. I like it. Thank you so much, all of you, and thank you to the audience as well. It's been a really good panel discussion. Lots of amazing insights. Much appreciated. Thank you very much, and bye for now.
Bye-bye.